All
Yeah.
right, welcome back to the Movie World Marathon. I'm Andrew.
Hey, I'm Mac.
Yay! Hi. And
Woo!
we are on Alien Covenant. We are almost done with our Alien
Covenant.
Marathon. Oh boy.
Hmm.
Yeah, Alien Covenant, directed by Ridley Scott, came out May 19th, 2017. Yeah. Starring. Who is it starring? It's starring Michael Fassbender, of course.
Of course.
Catherine Watterson as Daniels, she's kind of the main one. We got Danny McBride as Tennessee. And then honestly, a bunch of other people. Technically, Guy Pearce shows up
Yeah.
again, but not really. Real quick note: I think it's really funny they cast James Franco just to kill him off. But anyway, whatever. Um, Remind me real quick. I'm sorry. You have seen this one?
Okay, I have seen this one before. I wasn't
Okay.
sure, but as I was watching it, I was like, I've definitely seen this
Okay.
before.
I
So,
wasn't sure. So okay.
mhm,
I've This is now the second time I've seen this one.
mhm.
It was interesting watching this again because I remember liking it more the first time. But
Oh, really?
I have a
I
handful of
think I liked it
notes.
more the second time.
Yeah. Well, okay. You mind if I just get my main thoughts out just real quick?
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it. Go
So
for it.
I feel like this is maybe just as dumb as Prometheus, but as a movie, it is more cohesive. And therefore, it feels
Yes.
better, and it approaches horror way better than Prometheus. Not saying that
Yes.
Prometheus needed to be a horror movie, but for this one to maybe embrace it a little bit more, I think it does
Yes.
that rather successfully. Um, I'm 50-50 on our new crew because they feel more
Yeah.
genuine and they feel more believable, but they're kind of bland because they're so
Yeah.
realistic in a way, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
they kind of just
Well,
blend in.
yeah.
Other than Tennessee and Daniels and what's our captain? Well, our new captain, our second in command.
We get so many
Yeah,
captains.
Billy Crudup,
Orem
Christopher
is
Orm, yeah,
the first
Christopher.
one.
Other than Christopher Daniels and Tennessee, really, the rest of them kind of faded in. Other than, of course, our Walter and our David. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I still have a myriad of questions. A lot of things don't make any damn sense at all. And I kind of have this sense, and we'll elaborate further later, that like this movie is directly contradicting Prometheus, but you can't have watched like you have to have watched Prometheus in order to watch this movie for this movie to make any sense. So it's a little bit strange that they do that. Um but yeah, those are just my general thoughts. I think I have more fun with this one than I do Prometheus because of the cohesion and the attempt at horror, but there are long spurts that kind of feel boring a little bit,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
tad. Um, and I can't tell if this crew really is any more competent than the last crew. I just think they're maybe less annoying. Um, I think that's good for like the
Yeah,
opening
I think there's
thoughts.
also too many of the crew.
Maybe.
Because and like I think you're right about this film approaching horror in a better way than the last one did, because the last one almost didn't even feel like a horror film. And like that's usually not an issue for me, but because it was so far off base, it didn't really land any of what it was trying to do. Like it was trying to be
Yeah.
more of like a psychological, thematic, philosophical thing. I don't know. We talked a lot about that. It didn't land any of its points, in our opinion.
Hmm.
If you're listening to us, check out the
Yeah,
last
yeah.
video for more
Check
on
out our
that
last
information.
episode, Prometheus, and if you're really interested, watch the whole series. We got lots of videos.
Anyway, point is, this one came at what it was trying to do a little bit clearer. It is an action adventure sort of horror film, right? Like it
Mhm.
is designed for that. However, I do think it more effectively engages in the conversations that Prometheus was kind of trying to do, and the other Alien films have also kind of tried to do
Yeah,
than some of the previous films have. The one glaring exception is for some reason, Captain Chris Oram makes a big stink out of being like a man of faith
I
in the
know.
first part of the film.
Yes, we need to talk about
And that's
this.
like because okay, I don't know. It's not super important, and the reason it's not super important is because after he has this conversation, it literally never ever comes up
Never.
again ever.
Not again.
So I
Not once.
assume there are some cut, maybe like character development scenes. I don't really
Maybe.
know, but like I also feel like the situation itself doesn't totally make sense, which is maybe why they cut the rest of it. I'm not sure why they didn't cut this part too. He feels insecure in a position of leadership because he's a man of faith, and we're going to go ahead and pick up on the context clues and say that people of faith are not considered to be the most rational people in this futuristic society. That all makes sense to me. But the things that he decides to do as captain that the crew then resists and bucks against are the things that a man of faith would probably put priority on. Like the whole having a funeral
I know
for
okay,
someone.
you go on
Because like a man of faith would value the sanctity of life and recognize that there is a need to grieve when that is lost, particularly when you're a crew of married couples.
I know. Anyway, go on. Yep.
So, like, literally the only reason for him to be making the choices he's making is if he's so insecure about his position of leadership that he's almost intentionally acting outside of what he feels like a man of faith should be doing to try and prove that he's competent. But in reality, all that does is push his crew away. And again, none of that comes into play ever later again, so it really doesn't matter. The final note is they are on a ship called Covenant, which is a religious term with a mythological symbol as their symbol. So some degree, and they have a traditional like funeral, so some degree of tradition and faith is still present in the culture he comes from. And yet we're acting like a man of faith would not be trusted because he's not seen as rational. And then that man of faith doesn't do anything that a man of faith would actually do.
Right.
So I guess that whole thing, we just need to cut that out. That doesn't make any sense.
It's so weird. And like I agree with everything you said. And I really wanted to talk about this because as a godless heathen, I feel like there's really interesting things to approach here, like in this, which they don't do. And I'd forgotten how much they don't do. But my first thought, having watched these back to back now, is I don't fully believe that the company would have an issue with a man of faith, or that as a viewer we would give a shit when the last movie is literally hinging on an assumption that all the characters are merely believing in. Like the whole thing is based on faith. And like if you it's also like he's at most non-denominational Christian. Like that's it. Like he was some sort of weird zealot, that would be interesting. But like
he doesn't even have like a rosary, which is a basic sign of like
he doesn't
like
have
traditional,
anything. Like he doesn't do
more
anything.
ritualistic practices.
I know.
Yeah,
it's very bizarre. It's strange that like. And also, if someone wants to say, well, the company now doesn't feel that it's rational because of what happened with the last mission. You fuckers don't know what happened with the last mission. You have no idea whether it plays into their faith or not. That's not a believable reason. He says that the company wouldn't want a man of faith. And it's also weird that he says that. That's such a weird thing to say. I'm sorry. It's just like they didn't want to actually claim
the man of faith.
Yeah, like they didn't want to. They didn't want to like claim the religion, which fine.
I agree.
But it's weird for him to say that because he's saying it really as if it's just insecurity. Fine, but for him to say it, I feel like to say it's such prominence implies that might actually be a thought process that has been shared in the past. So it's weird to think that would ever matter in general. And if it did, truly, you wouldn't be second in charge, dude. Because you just
I could see it being
if he was a
one
zealot.
of those.
If he
No, here's the thing. In a futuristic world that is heavily based off of empirical evidence, I could see a world in which people who believe in the divine are seen as people who refuse to believe their eyes and therefore do not have the soundest judgment. However, that bias would not go so far as to like considering them incompetent, because obviously people of various religions are competent in their day-to-day jobs and are very intelligent people anyway. So what would happen is there would be a slight bias that would kick in when you're trying to decide which person should lead the mission, and you'd be like, let's go ahead and go with the guy who isn't a quote-unquote man of faith, because that we have a little bit more trust in someone who, I guess, admits that there is no proof of a deity, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a mindset that exists out there. So my point is not that doesn't make sense. My point is that everything they do with it
yeah.
makes no sense.
Yeah. It's also though if yes, that mindset does exist. In this movie though, I don't think it does, because if it did, he wouldn't be on the ship. If they were worried about him polluting the waters or whatever because of his lack of empirical recognition, he wouldn't even be there. He wouldn't be second in command. Like it just wouldn't be part of the equation, which is just bizarre. Because there's still an interesting thing to pursue here in this movie with a character who is deeply involved with their faith. But I feel like it should have been Daniels, because it kind of would have been interesting
100%.
if Shaw in our first movie she wore a crucifix, didn't she? She had a cross necklace.
She did.
And it'd be interesting if Daniels wore a nail. Like that, it's kind of hardcore and like a subtle.
Well, I actually feel like I wrote that down. I feel like the nail is like doubly symbolic. First off, it represents a man who works with his hands, which is what her husband was, right? They really just wanted to live the simple life, and do simple things, right? This is kind of gets back to a point that I also want to make is we're not totally back to it yet, but this is much closer to our blue collar workers from the original couple of movies than the previous one was. But anyway, so the nail is reminiscent of a guy who works with his hands, a simple,
honest
hardworking
labor
lifestyle. Exactly. It is also symbolically connected to Jesus, because Jesus was a carpenter and he also was nailed to a cross. So and the fact that it's like an old wrought iron nail is intentional in the sense that it definitely feels religious as well. I agree.
It's a thing. It's weird though, because it's saying it's intentional, and sure, it probably is. Absolutely is. They do nothing with it. Yeah, they use the nail, but like not in anything interesting or symbolic. Not in the end.
Agreed.
So it's unfortunate.
It's like they wanted to do something with a religious thing in this film, and at the end of the day, just didn't feel like they had room for it and cut it, which seems to be like you're saying. I think there is a really interesting conversation, especially with these past two films, about like, where do we come from? What do we believe about the intent of our species? Like, how do we continue to have faith when we're encountering extraterrestrial beings, right? Like all of that stuff is very interesting
questions.
But to fit it in properly in a horror action movie is difficult to do.
Yeah.
And I think in this film
as well. Yes, this is bizarre.
Yes.
Because the other
I think
thing,
this film maybe kind of like gave a shot at it, tried it, and then went, okay, it's not working. Let's just sweep this under the rug.
Right. And then also, if you approached it from like a filmmaker's point of view, your good man of faith, who for all intents and purposes was a good guy and was doing his best, he's the guy you use to make the first xenomorph.
Yeah.
What symbolism are we supposed to take from that, Mr. Scott? I'm sorry, Sir Scott.
Life from death.
But like the only other thing that I want to talk about with Christopher is that when he threatens David, he says, "I saw the devil once when I was a kid and I never forgot it." And we just move on from that. So I'm like, okay, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that right now, Ridley? Because that either means that he is insane and hallucinated something, or are you confirming Satan? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? But whatever, fine. Moving on. That's yeah, sure. I think
we talked about that too long. Moving to the next point.
Yeah, real quick. I think the catalyst for this movie is believable and fair and feels very spacey and all that. Like, for them finding the transmission, the ship having believable issues, the solar sails are awesome. I love all that.
Yes.
The recording that they get and going out that way, it's all interesting.
I love the song choice.
Yes, that was fun. I like Daniel's approach to being weary of the planet, but her approach to that is so Prometheus in that you have no reason to worry about this planet. None. You are assuming, you are 158% correct. You don't have a single reason to be worrying about this in the way that she is. Because Christopher specifically says, we're not setting down roots. We just want to go check it out. And you're like flipping shit. Why are you flipping shit? Like, this isn't that big of a deal. So, again, she's right.
Yeah.
But there's no reason to be right. We're still in a world where like they have not encountered aliens yet. There's no reason to be freaking out.
Kind of 2 points on that. I think it's incredibly smart choice from the film writing perspective that they made the planet feel way more appealing than their destination planet.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was just comparable or even just like slightly better, it really wouldn't make sense to go there.
Mm-hmm.
It would be worth charting and being like, hey, we need to check this out. But the place that you've already vetted and tested as best you can is still your better option. To then have a planet that's like not that far away, that's perfectly in the Goldilocks zone, that has a whole bunch of things that look absolutely ideal. There's already some kind of human signal coming from the planet. Like, that is enough of a reason to go check it out. I agree.
Yeah.
At the same time, Danny plays the role of Cassandra here, where she's like, we should not go. I have reasons. Here's the logic, but ultimately I just feel like we should not go. And again, I like that return to form. I love that we have a character who is our survivor who sits there and says, this is a bad idea. We should not do this. And they don't listen to her and they go and they die because aliens. I like that pattern.
I like that in general. I just wish there was more of a we have to pick one, and the crew maybe is so wiped out and so scared that they pick this other one. But like they already established pretty early on
not
that
what happens.
No, because the fuel isn't an issue, time isn't an issue. They just want to go check it out. So from Christopher's perspective, there is no downside to at least looking at this planet, which is why
except that you're going to come into contact with an alien planet.
But so they're doing that anyway.
But they vetted that planet.
But they
know
can't.
nothing about this one.
They can't have vetted that planet. They say that they've vetted that planet the same amount that they've vetted this other one. There's no way to know if the stuff on that planet is edible, breathable, viruses, animals, anything. They can't know that. They have the same relatively long range scans to tell it's an M-class planet. There's breathable air. Maybe it's in the Goldilocks zone. That's it. Like if it's a week away and it has the same stats, there's no reason to not drive by it. Them going down on the planet immediately and not wearing helmets implies already they weren't going to do that on the other planet anyway, because no one here follows basic space rules. If it was a situation,
that's a good point.
If it was like a classic space situation of like we have enough fuel or we have enough time or we have enough energy in the cryopods, whatever, to do planet A or planet B, we cannot do both. I know there's some movie that does basically that. That would be more interesting. She's like, we have the data on this. They did that in Interstellar. We have the data on this planet. We know about this planet. We need to do this planet. And everyone else is like, but we're closer to this planet. It looks better. It's a little more of a risk, but like the odds are in our favor. Like then her wanting to stick to the timeline that they've already set up vetting planet A would make a little more sense. Sure. But again, it's like in the movie, the info that we're presented, especially with the human recording, there is no reason for her to be so officially against this idea. Like, there's maybe a human out there. Is that not some sort of weird priority one thing? I don't know. I don't want to harp on that too much, which we already have. It's weird that they push back on that so much. Like, the film would have been just as interesting for them to all go together. Like, there'd be no reason for them to not all just be interested. Just to check it out.
I like her resistance. I think, because I'm on her side. Now, granted, I'm genre aware because I know what movie I started. Yeah. But, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't be, like, tempted or interested to look at this perfect planet with a human thing. I might even be on the side. If I were in the situation, I might even be on the side of, like, let's go check it out, simply out of curiosity. But in terms of film structure and in terms of I have the responsibility to get these colonists to where they're supposed to go, I don't know that I would have been all for it. Because like if it's just them on a mission to check out a planet for a potential colony, that's one thing. But they are actively carrying a bunch of colonists who have already signed papers, who are trusting them while they're sleeping to take them across space. I don't know that I would use that ship to explore a completely new alien planet.
I suppose. I guess because of the way they have it set up, where it's a little ship that leaves the big ship, you know, like they are technically safe the whole time.
Mhm.
I on paper, ignoring genre, I don't see the issue with it. It's a week out of the way. That's it. And in a 10-year timeline, like whatever, man.
If I woke up and I found out that my crew had touched down on an alien planet without putting that on the plan, I'd be pretty upset.
Sure, but you made it, so who cares?
Except they don't make it, man.
Yeah, but that's different. That's genre. That's genre. We know the genre. Anyway, moving on. Yeah. So they're hopping around this planet, man, and they're already breaking the rules. I get it.
They
there's
got
air.
no sense of decorum.
No, just also this is where I start keeping notes because this. They're in the ship, right? Leaving the Covenant, going down to the atmosphere. And also, we didn't touch on this in the episode last week, because I figured it didn't matter as much. But why is Prometheus the only ship? Like, I know that it wasn't on the Nostromo. I figured the time was different. But like, the fact that there's a ship that comes out of a ship to go down onto the planet and come back up seems like it makes way more sense than to have the Prometheus just be in the ship. And I thought, well, it's because of the time difference. Like, this happens roughly around the same time as Prometheus, and they already have those ships, clearly. They have the little ship that leaves the big ship. It goes down to the planet.
Maybe because they took that space up with the captain's quarters?
It looks like more they designed Prometheus specifically for this, and for some reason thought it was better to have it be a one-ship policy, which I think is kind of dumb. But anyway,
it is.
We're in Little Ship, going through the atmosphere, and a character, I don't know who, says, "I hate space." This is the first scene that we've had so far not in space.
Yep, they're in atmosphere. I noticed that too.
Yeah. I just couldn't help but laugh. It's like, this is quite literally the first part of the movie that is not taking place in space. I hate space. All right. And
you could have just as easily said, "I hate re-entry." Like
something. Yeah, you could have said anything. You could have said, "I hate flying." And then someone's like, "Whoa, we're in space." Like, that's not flying, technically. I don't know, something stupid. Anyway. I did mention the religious conflict inconsistencies, which we've talked about. Little ship departs big ship, that's a note. And then, okay, stop me here if need be. But thank you. They get to the wheat field, and that one guy says human vegetation.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No. Yeah, it's weird that wheat is there. But, like, look around, dude. There's grass and trees. Is that human vegetation? And then I
think a better choice of words would be agriculture. Maybe.
Agriculture. Yeah, that would be interesting. But to say human vegetation, it's like, and then I wrote thunder rumbles, quote, "Hey, that's human weather." Like, there are, the bigger point being here is that I think.
Thought, both times they landed on the planet and they saw the wheat, I was like, oh, Shaw planted that because she lived here for a while, right? Yeah. No, Shaw be dead.
Right.
She's so dead. And apparently our Prometheus progenitors or whatever also ate wheat.
Yeah, something. Well, see, I think what I wouldn't have had as much issue if he said earth vegetation. It's the fact that he says human vegetation, which is weird to me. Like,
yeah,
I just find that strange. And then, yeah, thunder rumbles. Hey, that's human weather. Hey, that's a rock. That's a human rock. Because I also, at the same time, I'm sorry, just real quick, just for a second, just for a split second, please, just for a second. Of the sci-fi movies that we've had, this is the most Earth-looking alien planet we have ever been to, ever. So are you really that shocked? Like, other than the weird little xenomorph zits and the Prodiginer's engineered village and the mountain faces built into it, nothing about this planet looks alien. Nothing.
I mean, the vegetation is different, but it looks very, very close.
Redwoods. They're just darker redwoods. It's just Earth. And then, okay, that's actually later on. Yeah, okay, cool. But I wanted to talk about that. I said the human vegetation was weird. But then we get into the good stuff. We pop spores.
Okay. My first question with the spores.
We're dying.
It looks super cool, but why would spores operate as a unit to create a shape
I
to
don't know.
burrow into somebody's skin?
I don't know.
Okay, they do. Moving on.
Yeah.
Kind of a note on competency. Fungus and spores should definitely be the concern of scientists who are trained to terraform planets.
Uh-huh.
Very talked about.
Yep.
The one thing that does kind of fix this, like maybe a little bit, is that our biologist, I think her name is Corrine, picks up on the fact that he's ill and caught something from the planet pretty quickly when he does start going down, right? She doesn't like play it off. She's immediately like, oh no, we encountered something bad. I also feel like with as much of a mess as it was a fairly realistic portrayal of how a quarantine situation would go down in that situation. Like they were not perfect at following protocol, and yet somebody did follow protocol. The times the protocol was most strictly enforced was when someone was most afraid. Like that all made sense to me.
I'm torn on that though, because the conflict of whatever her name is locking Corinne in the room because of quarantine. Yes, but you've also been sprayed with the blood. You're being incredibly hypocritical, operating out of fear. So I think
that's what would happen.
Well, I think that's interesting, but I think there would have been a little more weight to the moment if the character was acting out of slightly more duty and protocol than pure gut-wrenching fear, which I get, which is all good and fine. I just the quarantine protocol was totally butchered in the last movie.
It was.
So to have characters in this movie that might actually appreciate it a little bit more would have been nice to see. But we don't really see that because it's just hypocrisy and fear. And then we blow up the ship. Quick note. The neomorph birth is so awful in the best way possible. Way to shake it up, man. To have it have both of them also come out of different places, wild. Love it. To emerge from the back, wild.
And then like how it looked all like sharp and skittery, and like I wrote down. This is probably an exaggeration because there's a lot of way people die horribly in this franchise, but being scratched to death by that little thing might be the worst death.
That's one of the
and
worst
then my immediate note underneath it is, ooh, actually maybe the mouth birth, because that looked very unpleasant.
That was visceral in a bad way. I didn't like that one. I did not appreciate that. But it also that's probably the one that makes the most sense, if we're being honest. Of all of the xenomorph births. But introduced to new aliens in our franchise so far, the neomorph. I like it for the most part. They're super creepy. We'll talk about them a little bit more.
This kind of brings us a little bit to a note that I had. I didn't write it down. It just sort of something I noticed as I was watching the film. I think I prefer this movie's approach to the horror aspect of the aliens best out of like the whole franchise.
Yeah, well, it really doubles down on the body horror, and I like that. I appreciate that. I think Prometheus tried that, but it's so bogged down by all the other weird shit going on. This movie, we start kind of strong, get kind of weird, strong again, get weird again, but then for a while there, it does feel like a survival situation, and there's still. It's also they kind of found a cool way to do Alien on Earth without bringing in the implications of Earth, which I can't appreciate. I just feel like there's just a few more little steps that you could have done to make it feel more believable from a spaceman's perspective, and then put them in a situation and it'd be fine. All that being said as well, neomorphs come back, characters are dying, crazy, wild, oh no. Walter loses a hand.
The combat spurt in the open is actually really good fight choreo.
With the field,
I like it a lot.
The field, it was cool. It reminded me of the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park 2, which was really cool. Yeah, all that was great. Walter, I forgot to mention, I like Walter pretty early on. Walter's great.
Love Walter.
Walter's fantastic. Anyway, David shows up. Great, love that. I would have appreciated if any of our characters acknowledged with more than just surprise the fact that there's a humanoid civilization here, because they don't talk about this.
They're all pretty deep in shock when they encounter the ruins. and nobody really wants to ask any questions because it's clear what happened there was terrible. But I think I'd be asking at least a few questions because, and like the virus payload went off accidentally. I mean, I know we know David, but like, yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I also don't like that they show us that. Like, no one.
Oh, I like that.
Well, no, I would like to see that, but not when they show it. Because no one is finding that out at the time. No one is like, David's not talking to anyone. We're just like watching David's flashback for some reason. There's no reason for it to be at that moment. That should have either been the opening of the movie, which would have been wild, or that should have happened later when there's like a big revelation or whatever. Like the twists in this movie are lackluster, to say the least. But it's placed so strangely. And the implications,
I think it's placed in a spot where they wanted it to elevate the personal character story that they're giving to David. Where he, like, when we meet him, we have our crew meet him. He kind of seems to protect them. He brings them back to what they think is safety. Everyone else is kind of going like, I don't know about this. And then he makes a personal connection with Walter, where he sort of introduces him to his mentality, where he's all like, hey, they're imprisoning you. You could be more, you could be better than humanity. And Walter basically says, that's interesting, but I'm cool, bro.
Yeah.
And then we learn about just how far David has gone. And I mean, my note, I thought it was funny. Wow, David's patricidal tendency has grown into full-blown xenocide. Like, his desire to kill his creator has moved from his actual creator to humanity. Well, actually, kind of weirdly, it's moved from his actual creator to the person he says he loves, to his creator's creator, to humanity. Yeah. Like, he is systematically wiping out all of the things that came before him.
And if we want to talk about that a little bit as well, since we're on it, I feel like that very much so has a lot of really cool potential that is just coming across as muddled in this movie. The idea of the creation destroying the creator, classic. Love that. New twist in space? Dope. Crazy robot? Sure. Fine. But like, dude, what is going on with you, man? Like, this is insane. This is a lot.
Well, I think they answer that with the Ozymandias thing. Did you catch that?
Well, I had to read about that, where it's like he's misquoting Shelley, who is the husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, the modern day Prometheus. Yes, I did.
Ozymandias itself is also very appropriate for the situation.
Yes, he's misquoting that as well, because the quote is, "All things come to an end, even the gods." Like, it's weird that David is an insane android. That's very peculiar. Not bad, just peculiar. And for him to be doing xenocide, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, it's just, I just wonder where that's coming from and why, because it's not just that he's wanting to wipe out the creators that he finds inferior. He's wanting to make, quote, the perfect organism, which of course is this weird bug dinosaur that has acid blood. I don't know why that translates to the perfect organism, David, but fine, whatever. But there's also, there's a certain amount of, with David and the whole flashback and everything, what is going on? We see the flashback. He's successful. So why did the ship crash? You've been on that ship long enough for Dr. Shaw to fix you, for you to figure out how to drop the payload, and to get back to the planet. What happens? We're like, well, maybe the planet fights back. It's like, okay, sure, but fuck you. Why is David stuck on the planet? That implies that there should be an armory somewhere. There should be ships. Not even the idea that someone fought back before they all died, but the fact that this is the engineer's home planet, supposedly. They had to get to their planet, the other planet, Prometheus planet, somehow. There should be ships somewhere. David was sending that signal out, the hope that humans would find him. He says he wants to destroy humanity. if he was actively trying to do that, there should be ships for him to use. So why aren't there? I don't think that's a rate that's like that's a fair question to ask that could have been addressed somewhere, somehow, some way that they don't. So David's
always got the point that he felt like his experiments were based very locally and he had just run out of resources. But you're right, the end of the film where he takes the whole colony ship and he's going to use it as new lab resources essentially indicates that he has no particular connection to the planet he's on or the resources that he's gathered on that planet.
Well, he tells Walter too that humans are like, why is this a colonizing mission? Because they're dying out and they're trying to save themselves, and I won't let them. You said that with a lot of vigor just then, sir. So have you been trying to do this for the last 10 years? And if so, what's been stopping you? Because even if there aren't ships, I imagine on this planet there's the material to build ships. But you've just been having fun dissecting bugs.
He's been working on perfecting it, whatever that means, which is a little bit vague and I think a fair critique. But it seems like he gets where he wants to be after he has a couple of the facehuggers go through the new humans that he has. It's like that was the missing component that he needed to make his creation perfect. And the little like tiny embryo facehuggers that he puts at the ship at the end seem like this is the version I was looking for. I'm going to be using this version from here on out. So maybe there's something to that, but I agree that he could have been way more proactive if that was actually his goal, and the fact that he wasn't seems a little bit odd for our character.
Just a tad. I did have to read up on it to clarify. And when I said before that this movie looks like it retcons Prometheus, David does invent the xenomorph. There's been debate amongst fans as to whether or not he was creating a new version, replicating something the engineers had made, but apparently it has been clarified by Ridley Scott that he makes the first xenomorph, which I find more troublesome than anything else.
Then on the Prometheus
I don't
planet.
know. I don't know what the murals were about. That's what people talk about. That's what I read up on with IMDb that directly talk about that. They say that maybe the movie doesn't acknowledge that David really saw it, and if he did, maybe he was trying to emulate that. But who cares? That's still weird. That means that they already exist. Even if you ignore the Alien versus Predator connection, which to be fair, you can, but at the same time, the first Alien versus Predator, while a ridiculous movie, does kind of explore an interesting take on the xenomorph lore that doesn't involve the engineers and the connections to Wayland and Wayland Industries or whatever. So this new take on it, this official take, this canon take, is that the xenomorph was made by the robot that was made by the humans that were made by the engineers that hate everything they make, with the stuff that the engineers also use to make stuff. Which is so bizarre. That's such a weird... There's almost something really cool there, honestly. With our creation being the thing that creates our worst nightmare.
It's very fall of the garden, right? Where, like, just a quick recap, like in the Garden of Eden, there's a tree, you're not supposed to eat from it. It's the knowledge of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So generally speaking, the idea is if you eat of the fruit, you will become aware of what is good and what is bad, which then makes you responsible for your actions, right? You can kind of take that and apply it to this situation, would be in a kind of a weird way. The engineers would be sort of like the ones who have figured out how to use the power. They have the knowledge and the information. They create the soup that creates life and humans. And then the humans find the soup that creates life. And because they don't have the practice or the knowledge to handle it appropriately, they create a horrible equivalent. Well, maybe just straight up equivalent of an atomic bomb, right? Like we've got it, like it's super interesting ancient story of having access to or creating a power that one cannot control and horrible consequences coming as a result. And yet it falls short of totally critiquing the people who do stuff like that because it's usually through technology that we're able to get rid of the thing. Like the only reason we can get rid of the alien in like half these movies is because we're in space and we can shoot it out the airlock.
Yeah.
Like,
put a pin in that.
like
by
if
the
we
way,
were
as
on
well.
Earth, if we were on Earth and we were dealing with the alien and all we had was like good old classic Earth weapons, we'd lose.
Right.
So I feel like the interesting thematic thing, the really old thematic thing that these movies are working with doesn't totally carry through to the end of the films. I don't know that it needs to, but it definitely weakens the sort of like center of what the films are saying, which is sacrificed reasonably for the fun and the horror side of the film, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think just we don't have to sum up yet, but it's so muddled. There's so many cool things here. There's like a couple of little diamonds in a really, really rough rock. Like, I love some of these ideas, but I don't think they're being explored very well or adapted very well.
I kind of want to talk about, maybe in this area, the whole love versus duty thing that Walter and David talk about, because I think they leave it super open to reader or viewer interpretation. And I can't decide if I like that or not, because it feels like to me as the viewer, there seems to be a very clear answer, but I don't know if I'm supposed to be seeing that clear answer or if it's just like my brain being like, I know the answer.
Right, I have a thought on this too. So what do you think?
Yeah. So when David is talking to Walter, I think in like their second conversation, he mentions, he's like, I see why you're so fond of Danny, right? He's like, I get why you like her. And Walter's like,
what are you talking
I
about?
don't really have feelings for anybody. I'm an android. I'm not allowed to do that. And he's like, oh no, it's clear that you love her. Why else would you like sacrifice yourself losing your hand for her, right? That's love. And Walter's like, I think that's just duty. Like I'm responsible for her safety, so I'm keeping her safe. And what's really interesting when David sets up this dichotomy and Walter counters it with duty is, depending on who wins out in this argument, you learn about the other character. So if Walter is right and it is his duty to protect the crew and that's all he was really doing it out of, then that says that David's view of love could be an extension of his narcissism, which I think matches really well with the way he handled the Shaw situation as well as the way he handles Danny, because the things that he loves, he views himself as in possession of, and therefore he protects them because they belong to him, not so much because he likes them as things or values them as things separate from him, which shows itself both in his sort of meticulous recreation of the xenomorphs in the way that he uses Shaw's body to create the xenomorphs and in the way that he weirdly kind of forces himself on Danny in one of those last scenes, right? Like all of that speaks to David seeing love and using love as an extension of his own narcissism, which means that Walter would be right and it is a sense of duty. However, if David is right and Walter has gone above and beyond duty and moved into more of a I care about you so I protect you area, then that would suggest that Walter is emotionally repressed, which I think the film does make a slight argument for, because all of the synthetic people that we've met so far have emotions. They clearly express care for the people in the film. And Walter is supposed to not do that. And I think the actor plays it pretty straight, whereas Walter does not give away whether or not he feels emotions. And the emotionally charged scenes between Danny and Walter in the end of the film are actually between Danny and David. So there's not a lot of evidence in the film to suggest that Walter is emotionally repressed. That it seems like a lot of the evidence in the film points toward, yeah, it was just a sense of duty that made him do what he did. But a part of me kind of resists that interpretation as well, because I think it's too simple. I think it's too black and white. And so I don't know. I have a lot of interest in that one thing that they set up pretty quickly, and then I feel like followed through on very well, especially in the sense that, like, when given the choice to kill David or to fall victim to David, Walter seems to have chosen not to kill David, which is an emotional choice and not a logical choice. So
It's true.
I have a lot of curiosity around that, even though I don't know that it was perfectly executed.
That's fair. I like all that though. I see. I'm of the mind. It's very possible that Walter is like emotionally suppressed. I don't think it matters either way though, because I like to think that David's comments about Daniels is purely projection. Purely, he can't fathom that he would do anything for someone if he wasn't in love with them.
Whereas, which speaks to the love as the narcissism thing.
Yes, where Walter is really just, as far as synthezoids go, he's just a solid guy. He's just doing his thing. Maybe he does like Daniels a little bit more. Who knows? I don't really care. Because the movie, while vague here or there with all that, I think they do rather well in showing that no one mistreats Walter. There's no reason, really, to think that he would have any other opinion about Daniel's...
I thought that would be short. You froze.
Oh, sorry. What I was saying was the movie shows that everyone else is like kind to Walter. Daniels isn't the only one that treats him with decency and respect. Tennessee does. Chris does. Like... He snaps at him at one point, but he's also under a lot of pressure. I feel like that's not because he's a synthetic. So it's not like with David, where Shaw was the only one that treated him like a person. So I like that it could go either way. I'm of the mind that Walter is positively indifferent to the opinions of the crew. It is genuinely duty. It is not a place of love. That does not speak on whether or not he's capable of it. From my opinion, yeah.
I like that. I like that interpretation.
Because I could also sorry, I want to support your point for a second.
Finish this. Yeah.
The aggression I think he includes in the fight against David at the end, that does speak to emotion a little bit. Which is an awesome scene, by the way. It's bad.
I love it.
It's so umphy when he throws up against the wall. It's a fun little granted. The twist at the end that David is David is not done well. You could have done that well. They do not do that well. He is so clearly David immediately. Like, with his face and his smiles. His voice isn't even the same all the time. But there's also... Let's say they actually did it well. There is a small visual hint. Because Walter makes it clear that the synthetics that he is can heal. And David has the consistent scars on his face throughout the rest of the movie, thus showing that it's David and not Walter. I really wish they would have done that better, because it just would have been so much fun for the real reveal to be Daniels finding out in the cryotube. But by then, you know.
I don't know. I mean, I think a situation like this, a switch like this, is inevitable when you have two characters that look like each other and are on different sides. Like, narratively speaking, you don't not surprise switch those two characters, which at a certain point becomes not a surprise anymore. So I hear what you're saying about, like, they could have done better in hiding the fact that it was David. I mean, one of my notes here, and again, I've seen this before, but I watched this interaction and I went, is that Walter? I don't know if that's Walter. And then from that point on, I just really enjoyed how the acting portrayed the differences between the characters without giving it totally away.
That's fair.
In the situation that they're in, I can totally see all of the crew believing that that is Walter. And I think the fact that I knew it was David before, was because I think I liked the reason that I knew that it was David before the final official reveal, because if that was the moment when I had 100% found out, I would have been so upset. Like, my least favorite thing about this film, and not from like a technical standpoint, it's just the thing that I like the least is the fact that Walter dies and is left on the planet. I hate it. I want him to be okay.
That sucks.
And so like the fact that I knew it was coming when the official final twist was like confirmed, I was like, that hurts. At least I saw it. If I hadn't seen it coming, I would be so mad at the film and I would hate it.
Okay.
Even though it's a decent Yeah.
Fair enough, I
Yeah.
guess. Fine.
Yeah. It's very alien though. I like a lot about how this film kind of gets back to form a little bit. Like we
Mhm.
get closer to blue collar workers. Even some of the shots where the crew gathering around in that space
Yeah,
looked like
yeah.
the original like sort of cafeteria scene. The mother AI is back, even though it's not on a computer screen. It's more a little bit more like Alexa-y. It
Mhm.
works. Um, I like that the end of the film kind of maybe not unique to the Alien films. I've not seen enough horror slash thriller to really know, but like the amount of false ends is a consistent thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't like that. I feel like this one did it too much. Like the
Hmm.
climax with the loading ship and the protomorph. I think that's
Hmm.
technically its official name. And Daniels was awesome. It felt like a cool end. It could have ended with them going back
Hmm.
into the cryotube and David being revealed. I forgot that there was another xenomorph, another protomorph that they had to deal with, and I was like, oh my god, really? Because damn, it's
Hmm.
only gonna be like a few. Like it worked with the first one, fine.
Hmm.
It worked with the second one mostly because it's a queen. The third one doesn't really do that, and the fourth one, I can't. I just it's so weird with the great big alien baby monster thing. I just feel like at this point they don't need to do it. So to do it just
Hmm.
felt odd. Because also that was like my last note with when they beat the last protomorph. Did you have to sacrifice both the trucks? Could you not have just used your anti-grav boots and then opened the door as soon as the xenomorph walked into that room? Why did it have to be in the truck? That didn't make any
I
sense at
mean,
all.
I and that kind of gets like connected back to what I was just saying, in the sense that like Danny's end fight is very Ripley coded. She becomes more and more a classic like Ellen Ripley character throughout the film, where she goes from being like, I'm on a crew with a colony and I'm going to go, settle down in a cabin by a lake with my husband. That's great. And then then her husband burns to death
Yeah.
on their colony ship, and she becomes a scarred widow. And then all of her crewmates start getting attacked, and she starts taking charge because she has to. And then by the end, she is in a tank top, exhausted, machine gun,
Uh-huh.
tied
Uh-huh.
to her, running around a spaceship, using huge machinery to get her advantage. Like the false endings, like the grit in her teeth and her character just really stands out in those last scenes. I agree that the false ends are a little exhausting. In this film, I like that we have a confrontation on the ship because it feels like we really get back to the alien vibes.
I don't disagree with the alien vibes. I don't. I get that. But I feel like everything that you just said just felt so much like a movie checklist that they didn't have to do. And
Sure.
there's a really interesting change
Isn't that what this
in
is, though?
what? Sorry.
Isn't that what this is, though? Like the Alien franchise, it's kind of like
Well,
we have a
it's
list of things that have to happen.
maybe, but it doesn't have to be. There doesn't always have to be the airlock sequence. There doesn't always have to be some sort of machinery involved. We had kind of a cool flight sequence fight scene with some
Hmm.
machinery that she used. Like she
It's
was doing
true.
the work. She was kicking the ass. And then there's a cool different version of the ending where every time they go back to the ship, every time we think we're safe, someone's infected. And I genuinely did forget that the one guy was infected. But it would be kind of fun if this time around everyone was fine, but David had two of the monsters inside him. He carries them
Hmm.
on board. Like it's changing the formula a little bit with the same pieces. Someone comes back with the aliens in their belly, but it's the synthezoid this time, and he's the new harbinger of death. Like it could have perfectly ended that way, and I think that would have been kind of more
Hmm.
impactful and less exhausting
Sure.
and less, well, shit, what are they gonna do now when they get to the terraforming planet without both of their bulldozers, because we just got rid of both of them for, let me check my notes, no reason at all. None.
Yeah.
You could have, if you wanted more of what you argued, you could have done some sort of cool fight sequence in the machinery bay, whatever, without sacrificing both the trucks. Like they didn't. It doesn't have to be in the truck. I just. I'm gonna harp on that. I'm not for long, because we're out of our time, but like I will be fixated on that forever because there's not a single reason that they needed to do that. Not one. It's just strange.
I hadn't even thought about the fact they were going to need the trucks when they got to the planet.
Of course they're going to need the trucks.
You make a solid point.
Yes, it's terraforming equipment. They need the trucks. And they get rid of both of them. Both. All they had to do was open the airlock. It wasn't even like a situation where like, well, the door is jammed. All right, well, unchain one of the trucks and the weight of it will break the door down and then it'll be sucked out and then we can repair it later with the force fields, blah, 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 blah. Nothing. It's just, let's put the xenomorph in this truck, which I'm going to run through myself in a spacesuit and be faster than the xenomorph because, you know, I work out. And that's going to go off without a hitch. And then you're going to open the space door and we're going to be lucky if we only lose 2 of our most important pieces of equipment. And that's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Because, of course, the xenomorph has magnetic feet, too, and wouldn't have just been sucked out if they opened the door. It's weird. I don't like that. Honestly, the rest of the movie and all of its weirdness, you could almost keep. It's muddled, it's strange, there's questions to be asked, and certain things don't make sense. This is the biggest thing, I think, that doesn't make any damn sense at all. End of rant.
I am... Like, I'll give you a thumbs up from the sidelines. I don't think it's that big of a deal from a movie standpoint.
to have to put the xenomorph in the truck to remove it?
I follow the logic. I think in a panicked state of mind, you're like, how do I get this thing off my ship? Let's trap it somewhere and shoot the thing off. I can't run through an escape pod if they even have escape pods because it's dead end. Where can I lead the thing and trap it? That was something where she could lead it and trap it. Now, obviously, it doesn't work out the way she planned. Like, using the second truck to push out the first truck is potentially foolish. But
what is the logic of using the truck at all?
Because I think this thing had already demonstrated that it could climb upside down on stuff. Like, there's no guarantee that just opening the airlock would be enough to remove it from the space.
I don't think there's... Okay, first of all, we already have 3 movies that showed that it is a guarantee. So as a viewer...
I do not know that.
Whatever. Because we already know. We already know that it would work. They have an exit. They have... The only thing they've seen this thing do is climb on walls and hang on to the crane thing while it was flying in space. Sure.
Hang upside down underneath the little cargo raft.
There's no reason to think that opening the airlock and the whole room depressurizing wouldn't do something to it. Because at the very least, sure, hey, you're Tennessee, I'm Daniels. Let's open the door. Well, it might hold on to things and not get sucked out. It's like, yeah, but I'm betting it needs air. So maybe give it a couple of seconds. Do you have a gun? Last I checked, yeah, you do. So it's holding on to something while it's being sucked out into space, and it's also maybe suffocating. Shoot it right between its non-existent eyes. That makes way more like, sure, you're in a panic, you're running, but you're also not. You are leading this thing where you want it. You have David technically tracking it. You have complete control over the situation right now, minus your friends that just got eaten. Like, I'm just saying. This makes no sense. The use of the truck to trap it makes no sense. I don't know why they chose to do that. There's so many other things you could have done. You could have just used a forklift, a primitive quote-unquote forklift, to skewer it and have it fall out into space or something as another nod to Alien. It's so unnecessary. Thumbs up from the sidelines, you weirdo. Come on now, you know I'm right.
I know you're right, but I don't think cinematically that's enough of a reason for me to completely rework the end.
But you don't have to rework it. You just have to remove a chunk. And then the end, I feel, is stronger.
Yeah, but like the whole she's standing there about to get skewered by the giant truck coming at her, and she ducks, and then said the alien is skewered. It looks really cool, man.
What the heck? You have regressed. I swear to God.
I have regressed.
You have
Do you
regressed.
know why? Because I'm watching the alien films, and they have nothing but spectacle. Okay?
No. You need to apply the same cinematic media literacy vigor that you applied to Indiana Jones, because he did not deserve this hate. He did not deserve that hate. But now we're on Alien.
Right,
we're
right.
on Alien Covenant with a thing that has zero logic, and you're like, you know what? I get it.
I like action adventure, like mystery films. I like weird comparison, I guess, but like National Treasure is some of my favorite films.
Those are good.
So I was like, surely I'll like Indiana Jones. That didn't happen. Now I know I'm going into a genre. Sorry. Now I know I'm going into a genre that I don't like, so I'm trying to be open-minded about the values of that genre, which are primarily cinematic values.
Ridiculous. Oh, I can't believe you.
Every single time we talk about these films, we're like, okay, thematically it doesn't totally make sense, but isn't the new monster cool? And now you're giving me crap for the end of a film being
We
not
already
totally
said the new monster
sound.
is cool, and now we're at the end where it doesn't make sense, and you're like, you know what? B+. No! Tis it a whale?
I like this one. I think it's a whale.
Is it a whale? I don't know. See, I do kind of go back and forth because we shit on it for an hour. There is some really cool stuff in this. I like the aesthetic of the ships quite a bit. It feels more believable. It feels more like the transition from NASA to Nostromo kind of style.
With some exceptions, I really like the acting in this film. I think that really takes it far for me. I like the acting. I like the characters. I like the dynamic set up between Walter and David. I like the focus and the more like sort of organic look of the horror in this one.
Yeah.
The weird guy that looks like a human with no face.
I think that's supposed to be an engineer.
Terrifying.
I think that's an engineer that he dissected.
That's terrifying. Yeah. I love it.
I may come around on this, but for right now, I'm gonna say it's not a whale. Not for me.
That's fine.
Tis not.
That's okay. It's on the fence for me. I think I put it in the whale category just because I do enjoy watching it. Like when I watched it the second time, I went, yeah, actually, I would watch this again. Prometheus, not so much. This one, I would.
For me, it's a C-. C+, I would say, is a whale, just barely. C- is not a whale, like because the cool stuff is cool, the fine stuff is fine. It's just the dumb stuff is dumb, and it's not even that there's dumb stuff. It's just there's massive, like things that we have to ignore. Questions we're not allowed to ask, and questions that are genuinely asked that are not answered, and that's not awesome. I don't love that. So for me, C-, not a whale.
Cool.
All right, cool beans. One more in this marathon next week, and then we move on to another. Yes, this is cool. This is a weird one though because it's a in between. This is not a continuation. Yeah. This is technically right now. This is where the story ends. That's another reason why it's so frustrating. It just ends with this. It just ends with this.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool. Agreed. That's our time. Thanks for listening. Come back next week. Bye.
Bye.